Hello, this is Matthew here from the Nations of Sanity project. I'm having a conversation here with Anthony Michael, who's very kindly taken the time to speak to me.
Hey, Matt.
Thank you, Anthony. For anyone who doesn't know what the Nations of Sanity project is, it's a project that's built on the assertion that the only way to create a truly free society is to establish the non-aggression principle as the law through a universal peace agreement. And for anyone who doesn't know what the non-aggression principle is, that's a principle that's based on the concept of self-ownership, which is the idea that everyone has right over only their own self. And from there, we have that moral principle that if everyone has right over only their own selves, then obviously it's immoral to violate anybody else, whether it's aggression or any kind of anything basically that violates their own self-ownership. And this project is a specific incarnation of an ideology known as voluntarism. And voluntarism is something that I think is very synergistic with other, or potentially synergistic with other ideologies, because it doesn't specify any kind of economic preference or any way of life really outside the fact that you just respect everybody's self-ownership. And I kind of think that this is a sort of universal common ground that we could all unite on, regardless of how else we might differ in various preferences and things. And I also want to speak about how this can synergize with other ideologies. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to Anthony today, who I'm introducing as a progressive, but as he will elaborate, that's not the full story. So I'll pass it over to Anthony now and say thank you again, Anthony, for taking the time to speak to me.
Glad to be on. Glad to be on, Matt. Glad to have a conversation with you. And yes, there would be, as Matt mentioned, an addendum or just one little tag with that. Many, if you know anybody in the audience is from America or American, or familiar, more versed in American politics by chance, they would probably be aware that progressive kind of represents, when you talk about progressivism in America at this moment, it kind of represents the politics of Barack Obama and perhaps Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and individuals amongst that sect who perhaps save the last mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and perhaps Bernie Sanders themselves don't actually align or identify with socialism and things of a more radical nature, those sorts of politics, and aren't even perhaps typically sympathetic towards those sentiments, despite those politics and things typically more accurately and actually representing what it is that those constituents of those progressive candidates and those progressive politicians, what they represent and what they need. So yeah, it just one little addendum or asterisk to throw on there. But I'm excited and glad to be here to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah, like I say, I really appreciate it. I really do, because one of the things I'm doing with this project, and I know you've had a little look at it yourself, but obviously not had much chance. I mean, for anyone who's listening to this, I came across Anthony speaking to a YouTuber named Volsh, who's quite a well-known, I'd say, left-wing commentator, I suppose is probably the best way to describe him. It was an interesting conversation, but a little bit short and a little bit surface level. I wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about where Anthony was coming from with his progressive ideals. And as I said before, one of the reasons why I'm keen to speak to a lot of different people with a lot of different ideological backgrounds is because I'm convinced myself that voluntarism can work synergistically with virtually all ideologies, with the exception of fascism. And things of that nature, because obviously it's the other end of the whole authoritarian versus freedom spectrum.
Then we could work. Then we could definitely get along. We could definitely get along.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, for other people watching and for you as well, Anthony, I don't know if you're familiar with the political compass, where they have a kind of left and right, and then they also have an authoritarian and
right.
Sometimes they describe it as libertarian or anarchist or just freedom or something.
Yes.
And people often talk about bottom unity. And I suppose that's kind of a bit what the Nations of Sanity is about trying to create that bottom unity, because, and although, I mean, as we get into our conversation, I'll reveal where I kind of lean with regards to things like economic preferences as well, as we go on in our conversation. But one of the things that I really want to get across to people of all kind of ideological backgrounds is it doesn't really matter where you sit on that left-right line, as long as you're at the on that bottom line that represents freedom, as long as you can respect everybody else's self-ownership. Because one of the things that I find a bit frustrating, particularly with voluntarism, as it's associated with like libertarianism, is it often has a bit of a right-wing association with like anarcho-capitalists, or also like right-wing libertarians, who obviously focus on a very selective approach to the principles that underpin it. So you've got the principle of self-ownership, which gives you things like property rights and the non-aggression principle, but then they might focus on the property rights and not care so much about other aspects of self-ownership. I mean, one of the things I often say when I talk about the whole left-right wing is if you're truly a voluntarist or truly someone who respects self-ownership, then you could speak to a right-winger and you might have a lot of things that you can have common ground with them on, where you might agree with them over certain aspects of freedom where they take a stance. But then there'll be other aspects of freedom where they're very anti-freedom. For example, people on the right wing tend to be more supportive of things like drug laws. So they seem to abandon any sense of self-ownership and freedom when it comes to something like that. Whereas someone on the left wing, I can have a conversation with them about drug laws. I'm probably going to have a more agreeing conversation. Whereas if I might have a conversation about another aspect of, say, government intervention, then I might disagree with them a bit more. So I suppose I'm just trying to get everything down to this kind of conversation about this principle of self-ownership and seeing if there's a way that we can kind of all work together on that principle. And then even if we differ with, like I say, economic preferences and ways of life, we can still kind of coexist peacefully. But also because we've got that underpinning and that foundation of kind of, you know, as I say, freedom and self-ownership, then we can also work together much better as well to create like hybrid systems and societies where people that are very pro-free market and pro those principles are still free to explore that. But then people that see the value of socialist policies and collective effort, if, for want of a better word, is also equally viable. And you can have a conversation where everyone knows that no one's going to be putting a gun to anyone's head or using coercion to violate anybody's rights. So anyway, sorry, I went on a bit there, but what are your thoughts on some of that?
Oh man, I saw the perfect meme just today, actually, about this in particular, because it's such a it's such a potent problem amongst within American politics as well, and particularly amongst the right, as you mentioned, the extreme levels of contradiction within the right, and pretty much hypocrisy when it comes to talking about self-ownership and the things that capitalism is intended to offer you. The entire narrative of, you know, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps in America is not typically feasible, nor realistic, nor reality, and that's the case because it's structured not for, you know, individuals to really succeed, but for those who are in power to maintain power, and so, you know, we see the same thing with a lot of people in the right wing. They'll talk about, like, when it comes to actually you know, being able to control what it is that you create, they think that it's through capitalism, but in reality, they don't see the amounts of coercion that are inherent in a, you know, in a free market with primarily the capitalist mode of production. And so it's just, yeah, it's definitely, that's definitely something we also see. That contradiction that you're talking about is definitely something we also see in American politics.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think the other thing that's important to understand, because I mean, a lot of voluntarists who I speak to do identify as anarcho-capitalists, so they're very pro-free market and stuff like that. But one of the things that distinguishes what I would call a consistent anarcho-capitalist from one who's probably more suited to be called a conservative, or someone who's not really consistent on those principles, is the fact that the consistent anarcho-capitalist would define a free market as one where self-ownership is always respected. So, for example, when you have, like, for example, in our current society, we have a market, but it's very difficult to describe it as a free market, because I'm not just talking about government regulations. I'm talking about there's a big melting pot of coercion that's involved, whether it's talking about like, you know, resources that are being robbed from various regions, whether you're talking about like, you know, like slave labor being used and various forms of exploitation, which certainly step over the line in many cases of actually being a crime, you know, and violating self-ownership. But even where it doesn't, it's some of it's so morally repugnant that if people actually had the real sort of consumer choice that a lot of people like to pretend that we have, then it would be certainly something that most people would, you know, object to on a conscientious level and would, you know, would not want to support. But because we have the coercion, as I say, of the government apparatus, and as I'll come on to in a minute, this isn't and this is one of the points I want to make as well. An anarcho-capitalist will say, well, what we need to do then is we need to get rid of government and just let the market sort it out. As long as it's, you know, free market and everyone's, you know, respecting self-ownership, then that's all good. And where I want to come at it is say, well, no, you don't actually have to follow that line of principle. What you can say is, as long as we remove ruling governments as a coercive entity that has the right to, you know, violate rights and oppress us in various ways, as long as you remove it in that way, you don't need to remove everything else, because what you're left with is still a collective, is still a system. It can be democratically controlled, but can truly work for the people, because once you strip that the coercive powers out of government, what you're left with is a voluntary collective where the social programs have to stand on merit. Like a lot of the bureaucracy and corruption that's often associated with government is, in my opinion, a result of the coercive powers that they wield. You know, like over here in England, for example, we have National Health Service, which I know you don't have in America. And
No.
as much as I'm anti-government, I would much rather have our system that we have over here than the system you have over there, even though you could argue that government's less involved over there, because obviously you've got all, you know, like you basically a private system largely with a little bit of government here and there.
Right.
But even over here, the problems that threaten our NHS, our National Health Service, and the problems that undermine it are all related to the coercive powers that government wield. And let me give you just an example of what I'm talking about. Most people in England want an NHS. It's not even particularly a bipartisan issue. I mean, even people on the right wing, in England at least, want their National Health Service. You know, they're pro-socialist, if you like, when it comes to the NHS, both on the left and the right. So the majority of people want that. So I have no doubt in my mind that in England, at least, even if it's just because we're used to having it, we would want to maintain that. But the problem is our National Health Service is vastly underfunded, because most of the taxation that is supposed to go to it is diverted to other areas. Plus, there's a lot of corruption and bureaucracy involved in wasting money. We have the same problem as you as well with regards to the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry, although it's hidden a little bit with us in England, because we're not getting ripped off on an individual level, because, you know, we have this socialized system, but we're still being ripped off as a collective, because you still have that unholy alliance between governments and corporation, where pharmaceutical companies are able to vastly inflate prices, and whether they're doing that through a private system where they're just ripping people off individually, often in collusion with insurance companies, or whether they're doing it through a socialist model where they're just doing it in collusion with the government that's obviously funding it through the money they take from the people. Either way, both systems are undermined by the same fundamental problem, and this comes back to my kind of overall point, which I'll probably repeat a lot in this conversation, is that I feel like all of the problems that we have that undermine our society are either directly or indirectly caused by this one root problem. And that one root problem is the violation of self-ownership, whether it's ruling governments that, you know, claim the authority to rule over us, or whether it's any of the corporations that use that power for their benefit through lobbying and whatever else. So sorry, I know I went on a bit there. I'll hand it over to you.
No, you're good. I'm just curious about how you would best, you know, I mean, so as far as anarcho-capitalism, and as far as people who identify themselves as voluntarists, what would I call you?
Yeah.
Because I've in America, one thing that's like really gaining popularity right now is objectivism, which is along the ilk of Ayn
Similar.
Rand, or excuse me, Ayn Rand and everything. And yeah, um, so so is it more of a moral and philosophical kind of outlook?
Yeah, it is. I mean, well, it's that at the foundation. So basically, it's. I mean, to differentiate voluntarism from objectivism and from anarcho-capitalism, because what I mean, for example, I identify as a voluntarist, but I am not an anarcho-capitalist, and
Right.
there's a distinction to be made there. I mean, what I would say is most anarcho-capitalists, with some exceptions, but what I would call the consistent ones, are voluntarists as well. But you
Okay.
don't have to be an anarcho-capitalist to be voluntarist. You know, like a voluntarist can be anything. Like say, you could be a voluntary socialist. You could be the problem with objectivists is they're similar to voluntarists, as in that they both cite the same principle. They both cite the non-aggression principle or invoke it, if you like. But the problem is objectivists still think that we should have a ruling government that has the monopoly on the initiation of force, basically, or the monopoly on the use of force. So, and in my opinion, well, I think it's undeniable that violates the non-aggression principle. So they kind of contradict themselves. That's the problem with objectivism and people like Ayn Rand. Um, Also, and I don't want to get too much into people rather than ideas, but the problem with people like Ayn Rand as well is I think they give people the wrong idea about the non-aggression principle. For one thing, she always only spoke about physical violence, whereas you can violate the non-aggression principle without physically touching somebody. I mean, you could rob them for a start, and you could threaten them, and all of that. So, but also, she didn't really apply it very consistently. I mean, she's had some very disparate. For example, she had some disgusting things to say about the Native Americans, basically disregarding what happened to them by saying, well, they didn't really deserve property rights because they were living like savages and stuff like that. And all she showed, apart from showing herself to be a pretty contemptible person, was she also showed that she didn't understand the non-aggression principle, and which she's quite famous for being associated with. Because the non-aggression principle doesn't say, oh, you only get to have your self-ownership violated if you're living a certain way. It doesn't matter how she thinks they were living. They still had the right of self-ownership. They still had property rights for what little property they had. They still had occupancy and use rights for the land and the regions and the areas that they were using for hunting and fishing and whatever else, as part of their life. This is
Right.
this is the thing about expanding, and this is the thing that some people make the mistake with the non-aggression. Certainly a mistake that the objectivists make is when it comes to aggression, we need to all understand that we all live on this planet, on this shared environment. So like, for example, harmful pollution is a violation of the non-aggression principle. That might seem indirect, but there's no doubt that if you destroy our shared environment, then you're aggressing against people. I mean, you can take it to like a real obvious example of, if you dump toxic waste into a local river where people are getting their drinking water, that's nice and obvious. But there's more subtle things that are going on. I'm sure you'd be aware of them because these are often things that are associated with capitalism, like the way that, like rainforests are being torn down and like toxic, like how Somalia was used as a toxic dumping ground by international corporations. And, I mean, you can go,
Jesus.
you can go through so many things in the world and so many things that have been wrong with both the present day and throughout our history.
Yeah, I could tell you. I could
And
tell
it
you
all
here,
falls back to the same principle, Sorry, go on.
especially in capitalism and where I'm from, Detroit, have a very intimate relationship because of I mean you can just look to things like Ford and Fordism, everything that he spawned and his influence and everything, and that's kind of been the relationship that he established with the private and the public sector has kind of been the status quo in Detroit and a lot of other big cities as far as industrial cities. And it's been a status quo of subsidies, corporatism and corporate subsidies statewide. Michigan itself, excuse me, I think billions, a couple of billion over the past 3 years, as far as like increases in subsidies given to corporations, and it's in Detroit especially, it's been the consequences have been pretty harsh, and the consequences, the ways that violence has manifested itself that are ignored are that you're talking about are very harsh and very the relationship is very very much one-sided as far as like people within the closest proximity to those actual capitalist industries, and the people that are profiting and taking the profit outside of the community. Detroit every day, somewhere around 600,000 commuters come into the city and then take the highest earning wages outside of the city to be taxed properly into the metro area, which constitutes about 4 million people. But the actual population within Detroit of 600,000, majority Black African Americans, receive the lowest wages within the city and live within the city, that holds on to the pollution that is brought into the city and let out as those commuters go in and out of the city. And so that causes, we have the southwest end of Detroit is it's very famous, and it's very much a problem in particular there, but it's also a problem throughout the entire city, really. And I mean, it's even a problem for those communities that they're going outside of Detroit, but they're not going so far, they're not leaving Michigan. So it's damaging to the entire our entire ecosystem. So
yeah. Well, I mean, this for me, in my opinion, these are the symptoms of an inherently rotten system. And the problem is you have so many people. I mean, like, it's like to get ahead in the world, generally speaking, people have to try to find ways to work the system to their advantage. And unfortunately, because of the way the system works, whether it's directly or indirectly, that often ends up being a disadvantage for other people. And like I say, when you've got this apparatus, I mean, imagine, for example, that you didn't have a ruling government, but you had a similar kind of system in the sense of having, like I say, a collective. It wasn't like the anarcho-capitalist dream where everyone's just their own little businessman and we're all doing our little free market thing. Imagine we still have our collective societies, but we don't have the coercion of a ruling government that claims this authority over anybody. So anybody that's a part of any kind of system, like, for example, over here in England, if people wanted to say that I don't want to be part of a national health service, they could opt out. They could say, right, I don't want to be part of that, I'll cash out. But then we can turn around and say, okay, well, that's fine, but then you don't get to obviously use the service that you're no longer a part of. And there's this kind of give and take in this mutual relationship. When you have that kind of scenario, again, in my opinion, what you have there is you have an incentive for everything to run the best it can and actually be for the benefit of the people, because then all of these things would be owned by the people that are using it. So rather than saying, well, you've got this government, it's like when government give like money, like whether it's like welfare and help and all the rest of it, if we all together owned that as a collective. So as a citizen, imagine your democratic power if you actually, rather than being a citizen that's like a kind of subject of the state that has this ruling power over you, imagine you were actually more like an equal owner of the nation, and the resources, all the citizens, like people talk about us, oh, we're in this together, when we have particularly when a crisis goal, we're all in this together. We're not in this together because we don't have any choice about it, and we're forced together, and because of that, people aren't able to create systems that really work for them because they're forced to make best with a system that's just, sorry, you're going to come in.
The word, yeah, no, it's just, that's what it's supposed to be, like that's the idea, that especially in America, that's what the idea of government was supposed to be: power to the people, power for the people, by the people, for the posterity of the people. But so it's just ironic that the case is such that we've reached a point where we're not really, governing ourselves, and we really believe we are, but we really aren't to such a degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been like a kind of, it's just my perception, but I feel like there's been like a sleight of hand when it came to the creation of America as a nation. I mean, obviously there was when people that owned slaves could talk about how all men are created equal and stuff like that. That's kind of a well-known little irony.
Very, very, very good point. Very good point. Very good point.
But I actually think it goes deeper than that. I actually think the fundamental document, and I often annoy a lot of my American friends that love their constitution when I say this, but there's a fundamental flaw in your founding document, and that is the contradiction between saying that everybody should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a beautiful notion, and pretty much what I'm saying with the Nations of Sanity. It's almost like the same thing. Everyone has, self-ownership. You have the right, and part of your self-ownership is the right to life, you know, obviously life, liberty, which is freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, which is the way to live your life how you see fit, as long as you don't violate anybody else. As far as I'm concerned, that's universal, and as I say, that's why I push it with the Nations of Sanity. But then in that same document, they create this government, and through Congress and through these constitutional powers, has the ability to make laws, has the ability to basically contradict the first thing, you know, because if people are all created equal, and if people who have truly equal rights and no one has power over the other, then how can you have a ruling government? You can have something like a ruling government, like a collective that operates in the same kind of way without the coercion. But as soon as you put the coercion in it, as soon as you have a king or a queen or a ruler of any kind, whether it's even a democracy, even a democratic, even a true democracy, because we tend to not have very true democracies, but even a true democracy, if it's an actual ruling government rather than a voluntary collective that's democratically controlled without, you know, like without the coercion, when you actually have a democracy as a ruling system, then you've got that fundamental problem. You're violating people's self-ownership. And the problem is once you do that, once you violate that simple principle and you set the precedent for having an organization that can tell you what you do with your own life, that's when everything starts going wrong, because that immoral power gets wielded. It's a little bit like the metaphor I like to use. Are you familiar with the Lord of the Rings story?
Yes, I am.
Okay. In my, I'm not saying this is how Tolkien intended it, but in my head,
I'm American, so you know we watch the movies though. We of course we watch the movies.
Same story. But in my head, the ring represents the power to rule. In my head, you know, I'm not saying that's how Tolkien intended it, but that's just how I interpret it. You know, if you want to put metaphors on the story, I interpret the ring as the power to rule. And just like in the story, that needs to be destroyed. And that's what I'm trying to do with my Nations of Sanity project. I'm saying that power, and it's like that temptation. Well, what if we used it for good? You know, like how Boromir says, well, what if we use the ring against Sauron and all that? No, this is the thing. This is what the point I'm trying to make. And it's the same with any kind of ideology that uses the government and wants to use the coercive powers of government. That's the same as saying, let's use the ring for good. Because you're using a fundamentally immoral power, even if you try to use it for good, it will be compromised and corrupted by the inherent evil of the power that you're using. So that's just to underpin what I'm talking about. I like that metaphor, because it's like, you know, a lot of people think we can use government for good, and as a ruling entity, I insist that we really can't. But I do like to separate that by saying that doesn't mean we live like without collective, you know, without collectivism in a voluntary sense. It just means we take the coercion out of the deal. So
yes, that's pretty much, you know, what my focus is at this moment in time here in Detroit, is working on getting people to, you know, kind of see what you know, what it is that the founding fathers, what they were really, you know, doing when it came to constructing America, because it was entirely about, you know, subverting the will of the people, like you were saying, by creating that ruling class and giving power to that ruling class, especially, I mean, in particular, the you know, the landed and the moneyed elites, and these are reasons why my personal opinion is that America is not a democracy. Democracy has not existed on this earth. And America was at best a ethnocratic, you know, ethnocratic oligarchy with democratic principles, and xenophobic you know, ethnocracy is inherently xenophobic. But you know, a lot of Americans, you know, they don't see that. You know, the main theme in America is patriotism. So especially amongst the right, you have that being, you know, stoked up to a big level, and it even bleeds in on the left. So when you talk about the roots of America, people, they don't want to accept, because it talks about accepting reality, what reality is for them, and because you're, you know, talking about the reality of what this country was when it was founded. So it's going to, you know, automatically tie into that as well. But the way that I've tried to address this in Detroit here is through a magazine. So the one of the an important thing for everybody is education. And so I'm trying to kind of address that and establish a greater level of civic engagement within the community, so that we have a clear understanding of things like our collective history, such as that, the founding of the nation and where we are today, and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I remember when you spoke to Volsh, you very briefly spoke about like the issue of police brutality, which is obviously a hot button issue in America at the moment. And again, I would, like I do with, like I will with, like I say, I will with many things. Again, that's another issue where I just say, look, non-aggression principles law pretty much solves that problem, because one of the fundamental problems with police brutality is the fact that the police wield a power that they simply shouldn't have, which is the power to initiate force against peaceful people. And this is represented by a lot of the laws they enforce. I mean, obviously, drug laws is probably the most obvious one of those, because I mean, I love the Joe Rogan quote, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't remember it word for word, but it's something along the lines of, I think he's talking specifically about cannabis, but it can apply to any kind of drug use. And he was basically saying that, look, if you want to throw someone in prison for using a plant that makes them happy, you're the criminal, not them. Because what you want to do is assault and kidnap a peaceful person. And this is one of the fundamental things, because the point, because often when I present my idea about the Nations of Sanity, most people don't really object to it too much. They're not like, oh yeah, that sounds fair enough, but they don't really see how it's going to make a big difference to anything, you know, like, well, we've already got, you know, like rape, murder, theft, which are all obviously violations of the non-aggression principle. They're already illegal. You know, we already have, like, you know, saying, you know, the Constitution is already built on the idea that people have right over themselves, but it's not really, you know, that's the thing. It's kind of, it's half is and it half isn't. You know, the fact that you have a ruling entity that makes laws, no one should be able to make laws. I shouldn't be able to decide what a crime is based on my own arbitrary whim or preference, or even cultural traditions or whatever. I mean, one of the things that always used to kind of bother me, even when I was like a young kid, you know, when you're growing up and you're learning about the world around you, when I first sort of heard about the concept of different laws in different countries, and I was like, well, how does that make any sense? A crime is a crime. It shouldn't matter what country you're in, you know. It's like, and drug laws perplexed me from a very early age, because even when I was a young kid, and you've got the, you know, don't do drugs, just say no, and a lot of anti-drug propaganda, which most of which I believed at a young age. But even then, when I was believing that all drugs are bad and all the rest of it, I still didn't understand drug laws, because I was like, well, okay, even if drugs are the worst thing in the world, if someone puts a drug in their own body, where's the crime? You know, it's like, you know, and it applies to everything. You know, we don't put people in prison for going to McDonald's too much, even though they're probably doing a lot more harm to themselves than they are from smoking a joint. But, you know, so there's this absurdity that we tolerate in our society. And I kind of view it as the elephant in the room. Like, whenever we're talking about all these different issues, and we've got such a mess of discourse at the moment where people talk past each other, particularly when it's left versus right, because often they just want to get one up on each other more than they really want to examine anything or, you know, explore ideas. And the problem is underneath all of that, what's kind of almost causing it is this kind of, like I say, the elephant in the room that no one's really paying attention to, which is, look, underneath all of this, most people can recognize and agree with this basic principle that everyone has right over themselves. So if we work from that upwards, you know, if we have that as our foundation, then everything we talk about, whether it's someone on the right offering a free market solution, or someone on the left offering a collective solution, or someone totally out of either category offering a totally out of the box solution, everyone can kind of have a conversation knowing that it's within the paradigm of voluntarism. It's within the paradigm of everyone respecting everyone's basic equal rights. Because one of the other things I say about the Nations of Sanity project and this idea, I say it's the only way we can have a free society with equal rights, because the only right that everybody can have in 100% equal measure is the right over themselves. And then you just go from there. Once you have right over yourself, you have right over your labor, you have right over your produce. Therefore, you have a right to decide what happens with the efforts of your labor. If you're going to be part of a community, you have the right to decide whether whatever collective you're a part of is working for you. And if it's not, you have the right to walk away. And just from having that right, just from having the right to walk away. It's like a relationship. If you didn't have the right to leave your partner and they're abusive, they're more likely to be abusive because they know you can't go anywhere, you know? Whereas if you're in a consensual relationship, both parties can walk away. That doesn't mean you're going to walk away. It probably means you're going to work together, because you don't have to work together, but you know that it's in your mutual best interest to create a society where we have equal opportunities. Like, it doesn't just benefit me for me to have opportunities, it benefits everybody, for everybody to have opportunities, because then we get the best out of everybody. And, you know, all of the problems that come from society, even like low level crime and stuff, this is just people that are lost in life, that aren't able to utilize what they can offer the world and are being forced to make the worst out of their bad aspects. Sorry, I went on again there. But over to you.
No, you're good. Yeah, the real crime, I think, is poverty. In most cases, the reality of what it turns out to be is that the only crime is poverty. And I think so much of what about, you know, living impoverished lives is criminalized. So that is what the, you know, the crime is, because of those ruling classes that we talked about. Those that, you know, the interests, their interests not aligning. So the amount, like the amount of support for the reality, like the amount of people, or at least the you know, the certainty with which we can say that things are one way and not another, the certainty with which we can say that the ruling class subverts our will is such, to the extent that it makes it just nothing but, you know, extremely ridiculous, that that, you know, nobody is aware of it, and that's not what we're all talking about, that we're, you know, stuck yelling at back and forth across one another on, you know, Twitter and Instagram and things of this nature, in order to get that feeling of, oh yeah, I went up to you. I mean, and that itself is, you know, a specific and intentional construct of our, in America at the least, and, you know, I mean, more or less across the world, when it comes to things where, you know, electoral politics within representative democracies, and, you know, be the constitutional or, you know, excuse me, what's the term for your guys is a royal, excuse me.
I don't know what monarch, something to do with the monarchy, democratic monarchy, or some kind of absurd oxymoron like that.
Whatever they are,
Yeah.
yes, it's the same thing, you know, throughout them. And so you know, it kind of just makes it ridiculous that we have to actually, like, a lot of it's a lot of the time it's about history, and it's about coming to a consensus on history, and an interest that like a good, you know, good support for that notion is the fact that a lot of historians over here in the States are typically left leaning, because of their relationship with history and their understanding of what history is and history has been and everything. But
yeah, I mean, and funny enough, I mean, like, you touched on poverty, which is obviously is a big issue, and probably one of the ways in which the Nations of Sanity project might underwhelm people is the fact that there's no obvious way in which that specific idea fixes the poverty problem. You know, for example, if we made the non-aggression principle the law tomorrow, a lot of people say, okay, well, that's great, but that doesn't make anybody any richer, and it doesn't undo the crimes of the past. And one of the challenges of a project like this is accepting the fact that it's all very well saying, okay, right, no more theft from now on. We've got to take into account all the suffering that's caused by all of the historical theft. You know, it's like saying, okay, we're not going to have slavery anymore. It doesn't change the fact that we did have slavery for many, many years, and there's a knock-on effect to that affects communities and affects people. So I can understand one of the reasons why people might be underwhelmed by the idea is they might think, well, that's not going to solve that problem. And what I would say to that is it doesn't directly, but what it does do, in my opinion, is it provides the foundation for the solutions that you can then implement, and it allows those solutions to not be compromised by the corruption and the bureaucracy that is inevitable in a coercive system. It also prevents a lot of the things that cause that from happening anymore. So, I mean, all right, it's not enough to just say, all right, no more theft, but we do need to stop the theft. You know what I mean? We do need to stop it. That alone doesn't fix all of the past theft. And, you know, like I said, we've got this problem. I think I worded it something along the lines of, it's where the principles of the free society we want to create collide with the realities of our might makes right past, you know, and we can't just sort of say, okay, well, you know, we're not all starting from square one if we had a revolution tomorrow, you know. But again, the way in which we address those issues, if we do it with the foundation of the non-aggression principle and this concept of self-ownership, then even when it comes to looking at correcting or righting the wrongs of the past, as much as we can do that, obviously, to a certain extent, we have to draw a line under things and say, look, you know, we can't do anything about that, and there's no right, but there are plenty of things that we can do things about. But the way we approach it, rather than just saying this person's rich so they should give X amount of money, what it should be more about is saying, okay, well, look, we can have an understanding of property rights and how people rightfully own things. So people that acquire rightful ownership of things through voluntary methods, it's not perfect because there's still exploitation and less tangible things that play a part in those. But generally speaking, if you've not robbed something, if you own it rightfully, you own it rightfully. But what we have to accept is so much of particularly what we own as a nation collectively, currently controlled by government, and, you know, with this idea would be controlled by the collective people, you know, as a voluntary collective. What we have to understand is a lot of that has come through the theft and subjugation of other people. So there are wrongs to be righted. Now, one of the things that makes it kind of easy is when you look at, like, say you look at someone who's not a part of the government, but he's just some very rich person that has like estates and land and all of this stuff. And then you might look at him and say, rather than just arbitrarily saying, well, you've got too much, which just kind of comes across as jealous and without any kind of underlying principle, it's more a case of saying, well, okay, hang on a minute. What right do you have to claim ownership over these forests and lakes and areas of natural environment? You know, that's not in accordance with property rights. You know, you build a house, you own it because you built the house. You own the product of your labor. You pay other people to build your house. You own it because, again, voluntary interactions. But you just arbitrarily, through the force of government backing you up, say, I own all of these forests and lakes and all whatever. It's like, well, how? Why? There's no underpinning to that, you know? So it's like the best way to challenge immoral claims of ownership isn't to just try to attack the concept of ownership, but actually to delve into the principle that underpins the concept of ownership and actually say, well, this is actually how we decide whether people rightfully own something. You build a house and you didn't use slave labor and you didn't steal resources and, you know, basically didn't violate the non-aggression principle, then no one can dispute that you own that house. That's your house. And if it's a factory, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It's, you know, the same principle applies. But if what you owned was actually acquired through slavery, if it was owned through stealing resources, if it was owned through the destruction of environments and stuff like that, then that completely delegitimizes your claim of ownership. So even when it comes to readdressing, like, for example, the vast inequalities that we have in society, we can do that through what I would argue is a non-arbitrary means, because we've got that underpinning principle that guides us along the way. So we're not just arbitrarily saying, well, you've got too much, so we want some. We're actually saying, no, what you rightfully own, regardless of how much you've got, you're entitled to. But what you don't rightfully own, whether it's because you never had a right to claim ownership because it's just like, you know, part of our shared natural environment, or whether it's something you've inherited through, you know, slavery or through conquest, which most of what government owns one way or another was acquired through some form of conquest or violations of people. And even certain levels of exploitation where the exploitation is to a criminal degree, where you've got that kind of coercion inherent underneath, you know, that threat of violence inherent underneath, you know, like the modern slavery that we see today, unfortunately, which is often building our iPhones and stuff like that. And that's where the whole capitalism angle comes into it. But even the capitalism thing, I mean, one of the things that anarcho-capitalists want to constantly talk about is, well, look, that's not real free market. As soon as you have coercion, then it's not real free market. Well, that's great. If they want to define the free market that way, that's great. And I have no problem with a non-coercive free market if it truly is non-coercive. But the problem is that's not what we have today. And you can't pick and choose. You can't say, oh, well, I want to give credit for the market here, but I don't want to take responsibility for the market here, when it's the same system. We've got this system, and like I say, some of these people would say, well, it's not capitalism, and they'll have a different definition. And this is the problem where people talk past each other, because words like capitalism and socialism and a lot of these isms have different meanings to different people. So often when people are disputing it, the amount of times I've seen someone who's kind of on the capitalist side and someone who's kind of on the socialist side just totally straw man each other, just completely talking past each other. You know, like the person who's criticizing capitalism will be citing things like slavery and stuff that the other side doesn't even advocate and doesn't consider in his definition of capitalism. And then the other person, he's citing socialism. He's talking about, like, you know, like the coercion involved with government oppression and taxation being theft and all of these things, again, which might be aspects that the other side doesn't actually endorse. But what he does endorse is a collective system where we help each other, where we have communities, where we share our resources, like I say, voluntarily, because we understand that no man is an island. We don't live in vacuums. And everything that we all have is part of our collective efforts. So it's within all of our best interests for all of us to not be left out in that sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what's the most important thing for the continuation of people falling into that loop of believing that society has something to offer them and that they actually can achieve that point where it is fulfilling those needs, and they do have, because if we had a market where those base needs were fulfilled and you did have that, it was just a leisurely, you know, work was just a leisurely thing, and it wasn't, you know, do or die. It wasn't necessary to put bread on the table. You know, that would be the case. And the thing that makes people believe that is our current construct, I think in America at the least, is that they have the concept that they can one day themselves become Jeff Bezos and go to the moon and develop a God complex or something, you know, something. I mean, it's because Jeff Bezos has a God complex, because, you know, that we're stuck, you know, being driven towards that staying as our narrative. So I think that, like, that is kind of really much, or really pretty much just the question of coercion and Americans coming to, you know, to awareness of what coercion really is, and how they are being coerced to participate in the system that is, you know, sapping them of all their productive power.
Well, yeah, and that's why I think you're right, and that's why I think self-ownership is so important, because it helps us underpin a kind of a common understanding of what coercion is. If we all understand that everyone has right over themselves, then we can kind of go from there when it comes to defining coercion, because it's like, and like I say, and it underpins everything else. I mean, I talk about making the non-aggression principle of the law as the basic idea, but often when I sort of trying to describe to people what the non-aggression principle is, I immediately fall back to talking about self-ownership, because that's all it's about, really. It's about saying, look, if we accept self-ownership, then we don't have to have a conversation about, is rape wrong? Is murder wrong? Is theft wrong? It's implied by the fact that we understand self-ownership that we know these things are wrong. The same goes for slavery. The same goes for drug laws. The same goes for, well, taxation itself. And this brings me to another point I wanted to raise, which is kind of connected to the issue of voluntary collectives that I mentioned before, which is taxation is theft. But because it's theft, it subverts what it's supposed to be, because people that want the things that we currently have supplied through taxation, we understand that we want to contribute as a society to you know, to a certain kind of collective standard. We want to be able to help each other. Like I say, it's even the same principle that free market people work on. They talk about this dream free market where everyone's working for mutual benefit. You know, I sell you something and it's a great deal for both of us, kind of thing. They kind of ignore the exploitation that comes into play, but you know, that's their kind of more idealized you know, version of how that works. But what I'm saying is that underpinning of thinking, well, look, if we all work for mutual benefits, I say, well, perhaps that would actually be better if we took the profit incentive out of it, which gives that kind of competitive edge, which they feel can be a very positive, and it can be positive in certain aspects to have that competitive edge. But the problem is there's a lot of negatives that apply to that, particularly when the results of of losing that competition is that you're homeless or that you can't feed your family or something like that. So we want to, and also, and it's even things like, you know, I could talk to like a relatively wealthy, probably right-wing person who perhaps has a lack of empathy towards like crime-ridden areas and maybe very dismissive of the causes of it. And what I might say to that person is say, well, look, why, you know, what's causing this? You know, nobody's born evil. Nobody's born a criminal. It doesn't take much in the way of deductive intellect to understand what drives these things. And if we address the problems at the root cause, you know, like they say, prevention's better than cure. And unfortunately, oftentimes cures come too late and they're harder to implement. And that's why prevention is better. If we had a society, it's like the Nations of Sanity idea doesn't guarantee equal opportunities on its own. Like I say, I think it would create a foundation for giving us societies where we could create that, but on its own, it doesn't create it. But
that's kind of the thing. I feel like it, if you thoroughly implement it, if you were to thoroughly implement and, you know, maintain the idea that, because like you said, it gives you the foundation, it gives you the tools. If we really said non-aggression was the principle, Barack Obama would be in jail, George Bush would be in jail, Bill Clinton would be in jail, probably most American presidents would be in jail. But you know, it's like, so you know, I think it could really, like, if we really followed through on that and established that as a principle, I could totally get behind it. And I think that would, at the least, like you said, take us a very long way in, you know, in correcting things that, you know, historic problems that we've had. And sorry, I just wanted to jump in on
that's a great point. That's a great point. And the thing is as well, I think it cuts through a lot of our division, because when I see like opposing sides, whether it's left wing versus right wing, or I mean, even something as extreme as like Israel versus Palestine, if you listen to the complaints of both sides, they're both invoking the same principle. You know, like if Israel want to talk about how bad Palestine are, they'll talk about suicide bombings, they'll talk about unprovoked attacks on peaceful people, they'll talk about violations of the non-aggression principle. And if Palestine want to talk about how bad Israel is and what all the crimes they're doing, they will also talk about violations of the non-aggression principle, about having their homes bulldozed, about being attacked by, you know, Israeli forces, children being shot, and all of that sort of stuff. So, and again, it's the same with the left wing and the right wing. If I have a conversation with someone on the right wing and they want to complain about, oh, well, the left wing, they want to take away my freedom to do this and they want to rob me to pay for this program that I don't agree with, and what have you. And I can say, okay, well, yeah, that would be violating your self-ownership, but so does the drug laws that you want to enforce. So does the wars that you support, or the police brutality that you might turn a blind eye to. You know, so it's about both sides looking at this principle, this what I call the elephant in the room, and it's going to expose the hypocrisy on both sides. So I think both sides need to kind of be big enough to accept where they're not being consistent with the principle that they are themselves invoking, because that's the thing. You know, if a right winger wants to moan to me about his violation of self-ownership, then as soon as I bring up a violation of self-ownership he supports, he's got a choice to make. He's got to be like, okay, I can continue to be a hypocrite, or I can apply this principle consistently. Now, if you're going to continue to be a hypocrite, then you lose your right to complain about the complaint you were previously making about how your self-ownership's violated. If you want to go consistent with it, then you've got to give the other side their same rights that you want for yourself. And like I say, once you've got that paradigm, then all of a sudden, like I say, you take the gun out of the room, you take the coercion, you take this fundamental root cause for a lot of the corruption that undermines everything, and then all of a sudden, even people that previously thought they were, you know, viciously opposed to each other might actually find more common ground than just the non-aggression principle. They might find, like here in England, even people on the left and the right want socialised healthcare. They actually want it. You know, it's funnily enough, if we had the Nations of Sanity revolution tomorrow here in England, out of all of the things that might go and stay, the one thing I know will stay would be the NHS. We might vastly defund the police and massively defund the military, but the NHS will probably grow in regards to support, because that's what the people of this country actually want. And like I say, imagine if whether it's a community on a local level, or whether you're talking about the whole nation. Imagine a nation where, because people have that power to walk away, that right over themselves, because that's so empowering. Like I say, it's like an abusive relationship. When you understand that you have the right to walk away, you can walk away, which is obviously the option, but it doesn't mean you have to walk away. What it also means is you have the negotiating power. It's like, and I'll just give you a very little example here. And I don't want to get sort of too personal and all that, but I've had some family members pass away from cancer. And I don't know if you know that cannabis is a very promising treatment for cancer. And I mean an actual treatment to treat cancer. I don't know if you know about that. Anyone listening to this, research it for yourself. It's mind-blowing. But anyway, when through the NHS, obviously we're not supplied, it's not available through the NHS. And obviously further to that, it's illegal. So, you know, it obviously undermines people's ability to, I mean, cannabis is easy enough to get as a recreational drug, but when you're using it medicinally, you need it in larger quantities. And because of the inflation of the black market and the prohibition that causes it to be expensive, like I say, it's an issue, and you've got to worry about being raided, and if you're growing it, and all, you know, all the things that happen. And this is something that people in America, England, all over the world, sick people that are using cannabis as a medicine have that threat of the government busting in. They have the added expense because cannabis is, as I say, an inflated cost because of the prohibition and all of that sort of stuff. Now, in England, in a free society, apart from the fact that it wouldn't be illegal, so my options for being able to source this as a medical treatment would be, you know, much more abundant, because everyone would be allowed to kind of, you know, delve into it, supply it. You know, you could have labs testing it, all the things that you might want. But the other thing is if I had this NHS service and they weren't providing me with the treatment that we wanted, I can turn around and say, well, okay, well, here's the simple choice. Either you start providing cannabis on the NHS, or you can shove your NHS and I'll go to a system that is going to provide the medicine that I want. But I don't have that right. When I went through this kind of situation, I could piss and moan all I like about how corrupt it is and how ridiculous it is that I can't get this well-established, and there's a lot of evidence behind this, medicine when, you know, other medicines weren't available. The fact that I couldn't get that, but I also didn't have the option of saying, okay, well, if you're not going to provide me the service I want, I'm not going to be part of this system anymore. So that's why the NHS, as much as we love it here in England, you'll struggle to find anybody who doesn't want the NHS, but you'll also struggle to find anyone in England who doesn't also say that the NHS is in big trouble because it's undermined by corruption and bureaucracy. And as I say, all of that is inherent in the coercive system that we're in. And all of that would be solved, even though it sounds very simple, but something as simple as establishing this basic principle as a universal law, as I say, through a peace agreement, it just means that all of a sudden the power is with us again, because we have the right, even though it's only right over ourselves, the connotations of having right over ourselves, true right over ourselves, not the pretense, not the fake right over yourself, where, okay, you got the right to vote, which means you get to vote for some liar that's going to not do anything you want them to do anyway. Or, you know, okay, you've got the right for this. They're not rights, they're privileges, because the government give them to you and take them away at whim. I don't know if you know, there's a quite well-known George Carlin joke where he talks about rights versus privileges and how we don't have rights. And he was bang on. I mean, he makes it part of a funny joke, but he was bang on the point that he made. We don't have rights at the moment. We have privileges because we have a ruling authority that tells us what rights we are and aren't allowed to have. And we might lobby them and we might protest them and we might do all the things we do to try to get little concessions here, like with the civil rights movement, for example, in America and stuff like that. But it's just little concessions here and there. It's what they feel they need to do just to keep the boat from rocking too much. But it won't ever be any more than that. We'll never get the society we really want until we have the control to create the society we really want. And we'll never have that until we have the freedom that comes with the right of self-ownership.
Yeah, to kind of use the ring example you brought up, you know, with the Lord of the Rings, I you know, kind of for me, I like, you would be along, we're accomplishing the same goal and we have the same, you know, end. We just through different means are reaching the same one. For me, the way I look at it, I would be putting the ring on everybody's fingers and kind of, you know, equally just proportioning the power. And the things that people are like, like most important to them, kind of like the NHS in America, those things are kind of in agreement. We're in agreement upon, and across the spectrum, like things like Medicare for all are at record levels high, and sympathy for unions, sympathy for all these left leaning, what are called left leaning or radical ideas, we're in agreement on. It's just we're kind of playing against one another too much, and not having a focus on things going forward and everything. Which kind of seems to be the biggest problem going on over here right now.
Yeah, definitely. And well, I mean, it's similar. And I think the problems that we have in each country, they are, I mean, we've all got different problems in a certain sense.
Right.
But on a more fundamental level, we've all got the same basic problem. And that same basic problem is, like I say, that inherent rotten core that sits at the bottom of our societies, undermining everything. And that's why I just feel like I say, it's such a simple thing. And I mean, I like what you did where you flipped my analogy on everyone having the ring. The only reason why I would prefer to go with we need to destroy the ring so no one has it, rather than saying that everyone has it, is just because in my specific analogy, I'm thinking of the ring as the power to rule over others. So like, I'm saying that no one should have the power to rule over others. I know saying everyone has that is kind of similar to saying we have the power to rule ourselves, but that's kind of my point with that. It's like, no one should have the power to rule over others. So it's like, even a democracy, for example, even if we lived in a democratic society, in a free society, if 97% of this population decided they want whatever, they can vote for that, and they're collective, that's how it would go. Now, if me as the minority said, oh, I don't want to be part of that, I shouldn't have to be, unless I pre-agreed to be part of, like say we all agreed to be part of this democratic system where I agree that even if I disagree, I'm going to go along with it, sort of thing. But what I'm saying is the fact that no one has the right to put a gun to my head, even if it's the democratic majority. I mean, I can understand why democracy is considered such a virtue, because for one thing, it's something that we've been denied, or that's often been replaced by kind of like an illusion of democracy. But the other thing about it is it obviously seems a hell of a lot fairer than some kind of dictatorship where like a one person or a small group of people has to rule over everybody. You think, well, that's not very fair. It's much fairer for everybody to have a vote. But the devil is in the detail. It's no more fairer, really, if you really think about it, it's no more fairer for everyone to have a vote if what they're voting for is the power to violate somebody. Like they talk about the problem with democracy is it's a bit like, two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner. It's like that kind of, that is, and that's a fair comment about the problems of democracy. It doesn't make dictatorships any better, obviously, because the problem with democracy is the same as the problem with dictatorships. It's almost like democracy is a kind of dictatorship of the majority, if you like. And that's in the case of a true democracy, which we don't even have in our today's society. I feel like it's almost like a trick where people have been kind of tricked into wanting something because they've been denied it. And like I say, I'm not dismissing the value of democratic processes with regard, like I say, in a free society, I think it should be democratic. But
I think it's more like, I just think it's more of a question, or at least it can be when when you have a democratic society, of whether or not, because as far as what, like the only democracy, the form of democracy that we strive for typically is majoritarian rule. But another option is consensus, which is different. And so that would be nothing passes unless we all actually find a consensus, and we can come together because that's what the goal of majoritarian or what the goal of democracy is supposed to be, is to find some synthesis of all of us, together, so that we can progress forward as one communal society. And democracy in Athens, it was, at least like it's arguable, that because the presence of slaves makes it very, the entire situation questionable. But it's arguable that part of what they intended by democracy, and demos, power and crazy power to the people, is that they wanted simply for these people to have like what you're talking about, the power to, you know, and like we're both saying really is the power to rule over themselves, and you know what the ring analogy represents. And so I think as long as you establish that as the foundation, that the people have the power to rule themselves, and inherently, kind of like you're saying, you can never contradict that. Otherwise, you've lost that as a foundation, as a founding principle. And so it's that's why to me, consensus is, if it's not a consensus in my particular strain of democracy, it's not democratic. It's coercion. It's still coercion. And so we're definitely in agreement, you know, on that regard.
Definitely. I mean, and also, I mean, because, and that underpins the point as well, because you can have different forms. I mean, you can still have majority democracy if you agree that you're still not, you know, if you're still doing it within the paradigm of self-ownership, where, you know, like say, like for example, like you get like a company, for example, where shareholders might vote on something, and the majority will be what the you know, where they go, and the minority are obviously not getting their will, but they are still, but they've all agreed to that setup, if you like, ahead of time. You know, like if we all got together and said, okay, we're going to be part of it, and it's not going to be consensus, it's going to be majority, but we're all agreeing ahead of time that that's how we're going to do things, and we're going to, you know, if we're in the minority,
there's your consensus, as long as they're
actually, yeah, good point. Actually, yeah, because I suppose in that sense it would still be consensus. So actually, yeah, I didn't spot that, but yeah, I see what you're saying now. Yeah. So yeah, it would still be consensus because underpinning it. I mean, actually, yeah, and you're right. Actually, I didn't notice before, but I realised how, in that sense, we are saying the same thing, because, like you say, it is a consensus, even though it's not later down in the line, but it is in the sense going
that's what
forward.
That's what it's about. Yeah, that's what it's, you know, that's the goal. That's what the real goal, I believe, of democracy is to provide something that we can all, because I think we default to majoritarian because it's kind of assumed that, like, if it's popular, then everybody's going to, and as humans, we kind of have probably a tendency to sometimes, but the real root, like what it's really, it should be, at least, it's not, I mean, you know, of course it's not always, like sometimes it's not even really about even majority rule. I mean, in America, it's not about majority rule. It's about special interests and the rule of the few. But what we typically should want it to be is, I think, consensus.
For sure, definitely. Well, like you say, even if it's not moving forward, if it is at the beginning, if it is like you say, underpinning it, then, like I say, that's using different words, but that's kind of saying the same thing as me about saying, as long as it's working within the realm of self-ownership, as long as you're not violating anything. If you're doing it a consensus from the start, then, like you say, moving forward, you can be democratically majority, or even like representative democracy. There's nothing inherently immoral about, you know, because I often used to think about democracy. I remember growing up thinking, well, look, if we live in a democracy, why don't we vote on each issue rather than voting on some liar that's just going to not go along with what we wanted anyway? Why don't we actually say, you know, if this should happen, we all vote on it. If that should happen, we all vote on it. We kind of had that with the whole Brexit thing over here. But the problem is it's like, even that though, it's like, it still needs to be within the realm of, like, what you would call consensus, what I would call staying within the realms of self-ownership. It still needs to be on that foundation, because my point is whether you do it through majority rule, or whether you do it for, like, you know, representative democratic processes, or however you do it, it still can't violate self-ownership. So, you know, like, I don't care if 90% of the country decides they want to make all drugs illegal, they don't have the right to do that. You know, it's like, that's, you know, there's certain things that have to be off the table. And the whole idea about making the non-aggression principle the law, and this Nations of Sanity project idea, is if that's established, all of those things will be off the table. So whether we're talking about, you know, like I say, representative democracy, whether we're talking about, like I say, socialism, free market capitalism, whatever, what we're talking about is these things are off the table, these things are on the table. And one other important thing, I know, so I've gone into quite a lot here, but one of the other important thing I also want to emphasize in this conversation is it's important to understand that the non-aggression principle and this concept of self-ownership is only defining crime. So that's why I say it's synergistic with all other ideologies, because we could be different. I mean, I think I get the impression that we're kind of similar in a lot of the thing, our outlook, but we could be very different. You know, like I could be like I say, I'm not a right winger, but I could be like a right winger, and you could be like a hardcore left winger. But if we both have the same understanding and respect for self-ownership, even if we like have nothing else we agree on, so we don't want to be part of the same systems, right? Every idea that you come up with for how we should live and every idea I come up, we think each other's ideas are terrible, and we just think, no, that's terrible. But even then we can live in peace because we have that common ground. And like I say, it seems like a small thing, but it's not. It's actually everything. In my opinion, it's everything, and it underpins what you're advocating for. It underpins what I'm advocating for. It underpins what like a free market anarcho-capitalist is advocating for. And you know, that's what I say. So even while we might be able to not come together on certain aspects, we've got that foundation. And if we have that foundation, I actually think we would come together on more things, because I think once you take away, like I say, once you take away that coercion, which makes, right now, the left and the right wing actually do have good reason to fear each other, because either side has a government coercion that they could use against the other. You know, like right wingers fear the left because they think, oh, I'm going to have all my rights taken away in these left wing ways. And then the left wingers fear the right because they think I'm going to have all my rights taken away through these right wing ways. And my point is, well, if we kind of work within a paradigm where no one takes away anyone's rights, then all of a sudden, any conversations that we have moving forward, we can have them in good faith because we know what's off the table and we know what's on the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the partisanship, I think, that, you know, the fear mongering, because the fear mongering kind of really works both ways. People in the left especially don't want to see that it does, but you know, because they like to focus on how Trump is running around and using fear mongering to stoke it up, you know, and stoke up the right wing people who are more or less neo-Nazis and, you know, Proud Boys, people of that nature. But at the same time, you have fear mongering amongst the left of Trump and of what he's going to do, and the ways that he's legitimately hampering people's, you know, civil liberties. But that attack on civil liberties also occurs under the left wing, you know, regimes. So it's you know, just hypocrisy on you know, both sides. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, as you mentioned earlier, when you talk about like how if the non-aggression principle was the law, people like Barack Obama and George Bush would be in prison. And you're quite right to point that out. But another thing that's worth noting about that is technically George Bush was the right-wing president, conservative, Republican, and Barack Obama was the left-wing president, Democratic. But they're basically the same in all the ways that really matter, and certainly in the ways in which we would judge their crimes against people. They're basically the same. And I think that shows, it's a little bit like, just like I want to create a bottom unity on that kind of political compass that we talked about before, where everybody, no matter how far left or right or in the center they are, as long as they're on that line that accepts self-ownership and respects freedom, then we can have that unity. The reason why we need that unity is because unfortunately the other line is united. And as much as they might pretend to oppose each other, the George Bushes and the Barack Obamas of this world are very good friends and are very much singing from the same hymn sheet. And even if they might have genuine, I think a lot of their oppositions are kind of fake, but even if we took it on face value and said that they were genuinely opposite on these specific things, they're still working at that top line. They're still working on the line of authoritarianism, of coercion, of violating rights. You know, like, you know, Barack Obama doesn't respect my rights any more than George Bush did, any more than Trump does, any more than Biden does, any more than Clinton, you know. So it's like, you know, I mean, one of the reasons why I've never gotten into politics myself is because I just find them all so contemptible, whether they're left wing, right wing, or whatever. And like I say, fundamentally the same. But again, the reason why people end up picking a side is because they don't see any other way. They think, well, I've got to choose the lesser evil, otherwise the greater evil wins. But instead, I think they should really look at it and thinking, well, maybe the reason why we have such an evil system is because we're always voting for it. Whether we view it as the lesser evil or not, we're still, by our own admission, I know there are a lot of people that are real sycophantic Trump supporters, but a lot of people that are voting for him just because they hated Clinton so much, and just because they hate Biden so much. And it's the same with a lot of people that are voting for Biden. They don't think he's a great guy, but they hate Trump so much. And you know what I mean? So it's like, no one's really happy with what's going on. Everyone's kind of holding their nose while they're voting and thinking, well, I hate almost everything about this person, but that other person's a little bit more evil. So I'm going to do this because I've got to do something. And it's like, well, look, I suppose what I'm trying to say is people can play that game if they want, but they're never going to get anything other than what we've got out of it, which is this corrupt and evil system. And my personal plea to everybody that's listening to this is no matter what your ideology, no matter what your way of life, culture, what anything else, let's get united on this one thing, this one tiny thing. And like I say, it's a tiny thing, but it's also a massive thing at the same time, because the knock-on effect of actually establishing the concept of self-ownership universally through a universal law, like I say, and just to touch on as well, when I say about it being applied through a peace agreement, is the reason why this law would have to be established, like as the terms of peace through a peace agreement, because obviously it can't be established through a ruling authority because they would be illegal under that law. So, so it's this idea of basically saying, look, even when we establish the non-aggression principle, we're not doing it under any authority. We're not doing it because I said so, or you said so, or even a majority of us said so. We're doing it because it's actually an objective principle. Like if we don't, morality itself is not objective. You can reject it or you can accept it. But obviously if you reject morality, then you can't invoke it and you can't complain about anything. But if you accept morality, then there's no consistent way to accept morality without also accepting self-ownership. And once you accept self-ownership, then you kind of have to accept the non-aggression principle as the self-evident moral principle that comes from that concept. And once you accept that, you actually realize that you have an objective definition of crime, not one that's based on cultural preference or any other arbitrary kind of whim of some ruling authority that wants this or wants that. It's objective. You own you, I own me, that person owns that person. And based on that concept, everything else is self-evident. We don't need to discuss, well, should we make this illegal? Should we make that illegal? It's quite simple. Is it a violation of self-ownership or not? And then the answer to that question gives you the answers to the other question. And like I say, that doesn't mean that we don't go beyond that. And like I say, I do want to stress to anybody listening to this that, this is the minimum. This is what's saying what's on and off the table. It doesn't say what specific decisions we make. It just says what's on and off the table, what we can work with and what we can't work with. And what we create with that could be, there's lots of ways we can go. And that's also something that would be worth discussing, is all the different ways we can go and getting more into the economic discussions and the specific things, which we haven't touched on as much in this conversation. But as I say, I just think that conversation is more productive when we've got the foundation of the previous conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. To the whole to the point about Barack Obama and George Bush both representing the same thing. That's a really that especially is a really big something that we should be talking about in America, but we're just not right now in particular, because at this moment, the reason that we're not is because people don't realize that this moment in time, we're not intended to, we're never really intended to, but at this moment in time in particular, because they're attempting to get the left swing of the pendulum into office, Joe Biden, and what Joe Biden will do throughout his 4 years, what his goal will be, whether as far as what will actually happen, that's up in the air. We have energy, so maybe we can get something done to stop it. But what his goal will be is to rehabilitate and normalize the policies that have been status quo since Bill Clinton and since George Bush, especially the droning came in with George Bush, and Obama perfected it. George Bush did probably about 2 or 3 strikes just before he got out of office, and then Obama, he went pretty crazy with it. Trump, outpaced him for the year of, I think, of 2016 or 2017. But that's just one tool in the tool belt. The other one is genocidal sanctions that have been going on since, as I mentioned, since Bill Clinton. And these things, these are all a part of a toolkit that has been constructed by neoliberals and neoconservatives. And we have such a bleed over between the neoconservatives and the neoliberals now, where they're neoconservatives in the Democratic Party. And so for anybody that's stuck in the conversation of, oh, we still have to vote for the Democrats because they're not fascists, they're not really understanding what even a fascist is, or what's even important about that conversation about, okay, if they're not a fascist, then what are they doing? Is it still like, it's fascist isn't the end all and be all of the conversation. But at this point in time, amongst the left, it's just such a kind of like a trigger, those trigger words like you were mentioning, socialism and capitalism. The trigger word for the left right now is fascism, seems to be.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the way I view fascism is I almost view it as a spectrum. And as far as I'm concerned, all ruling governments of all description are on that spectrum of fascism. When it becomes real overt, like Nazi Germany or something like that, then you've got nice, obvious, overt fascism where it's being declared as fascism and no one's in any doubt that it's fascism. But you dial it back a little bit, and you kind of have what we have today, and it's still kind of fascism in all of it. It doesn't proudly preach the name of fascism; it pretends to be something else. But when you actually examine what defines fascism in all the ways that most people understand fascism, which I suppose I suppose I could present, although the term anti-fascist has kind of been sullied a bit, but I could almost present the Nations of Sanity and this concept of self-ownership as true anti-fascism, because it's the opposite. Because what fascism is the denial of self-ownership. It's saying, no, it's basically, it's authoritarianism to the most extreme. But it's that same principle. Once you have that concept of a ruling government that has right over you, then your self-ownership is violated. You take that principle to its extreme, you have fascism, but you dial it back a little bit, it's still really fascism. It's just people don't recognize it as fascism because they have this and they have that. They have these little concessions. They have these little privileges, as George Carlin called it, that just kind of make people have the illusion, like the illusion of democracy that you mentioned. It just gives people the illusion of choice. We've got power, we've got the right to vote. I mean, it's even a little bit like, obviously in the past, people were denied the right to vote, whether it was women, whether it was people that weren't white. At one point in England, people who weren't landowners, only landowners could vote. So like all the peasants, they didn't have a vote and stuff like that. But the thing is, it's like once we've progressed to the point where all these people have the vote, all of a sudden we feel like we've achieved our goal. Wow, yeah, we're free now because we have a vote, we have a say, but they don't realize that the system that they have this vote in, they don't have any real say, or what little say they have, or what little power they have is only to wield a power that just shouldn't exist, the power to oppress their fellow man. You know what I mean? So, and again, just to go that goes back to that, the Lord of the Rings analogy is, that's why I say we've got to destroy that power. We've got to remove it. We can't say, oh, well, maybe if we wield it for good, with all the best intentions of the world, I still think it will go tits up, if you pardon the expression, because we've got that situation where you're using something that is immoral and someone will have good reason to object to what you're doing for that reason alone. Like I say, the left wing give the right wing valid arguments against them, and the right wing give the left wing valid arguments against them when they ignore that underpinning principle. And the reason why it's such a disgrace that they do is because they invoke the same principle. And that's why I suppose I just want to shine a light on that principle and say, hey, look, everyone, see this principle over here that we're all being very selective about? Let's be consistent with it. Instead of just invoking it here and there when it suits our particular ideology, let's be consistent about it. And then people that have different ideologies to us, they can pursue their way of life, we can pursue ours. Maybe we'll come together, maybe we won't. But whatever happens, we'll live in peace, and we'll live in we'll be at least united under that, if we're united under nothing else.
I think that like I said, if you actually applied the non-aggression principle as a foundation for us, I think everyone would be, copacetic, and I think we would make a lot more progress towards what it is that we all what we're all kind of pining for, as far as for our personal and our you know, collective lives, what we can offer an individual as a society, and what we have offered to ourselves. And I think we're, like, you know, like we've been saying, pretty much already on the same page, both the left and the right, people across the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and we find common ground then as well. It's like, you know, it's like with the trouble we've had, or trouble you guys have had in particular with the, like, you know, the riots and stuff over the police brutality. It's like, well, that's, again, people on the left are obviously more concerned about the police brutality and less concerned about, say, for example, the property damage and stuff like that that's happening from the riots. Whereas people on the right are less concerned about the police brutality and are more pointing to the property damage and stuff like that caused by the rioters. Now, I can when you take a consistent approach to self-ownership, you can condemn both. I mean, you can still have a conversation over which is worse, and I think killing people is always going to be worse than destroying their property, obviously. But obviously, destroying people's property isn't a nothing thing either, because that can obviously affect lives. You know, if you know, particularly in communities where people are struggling anyway, and they're barely surviving, and someone burns down their business, and their insurance doesn't likely to cover it, because we all know what a scam insurance is, and you know, so you've got this knock-on effect. So my point is I could have a conversation with a right winger who's like condemning that, and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. But it is also, they're also right in what they're protesting against, the destroying. I mean, I think the protesters need to be separated from the looters, because they're not necessarily the same people. But the point is the complaint that the left has about police brutality and police abusing a power which, as I say, they shouldn't have in the first place and wouldn't have under you know, this proposal. Those people that are complaining about that are right to complain about that, because the police are killing people, and the police are, as I say, basically committing crimes more than they are preventing them. Because, you know, as I say, when you do these things, when you initiate force against peaceful people, you're the one who's committing the crime. So the police themselves have become nothing more than a giant criminal organization that are going around violating rights on a regular basis. So that same principle that says the left wingers are right, I can then say to the right wingers, okay, yeah, well, you are right. That innocent people shouldn't have their property burnt down and their businesses destroyed and all the rest of it. That's also right. But the reason why we can make this decision on both issues is self-ownership again, is the non-aggression principle again. And again, that's why I say, I feel like, you know, maybe I'm being naive, but I just feel like if we focus our energy on shining a light, it's not the end of the conversation. We still need to talk about economics and stuff like that, which we probably won't have time to go into too much detail now, because I need to wrap up soon. But perhaps we could have another conversation where we do get into that more, perhaps, if you're up for it.
Definitely.
But my point is wherever we go with those, that conversation needs to be done, like I say, with that foundation underneath it. So yeah, I've got about 20 more minutes. I basically set a little alarm clock for our conversation, because I didn't want it to go over 2 hours, partly because I wanted to keep this conversation bite-sized enough for people to watch, but also I've got another call I'm doing in 11 o'clock. So
Okay.
So we've got about 20 more minutes. We don't have to do the full 20 minutes, but I've got to wrap up in 20 minutes. So probably wrap up soon. But if you are up for another conversation, because there is still a lot to discuss, I think, and things that we can talk about, I'd be up for that.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, one of the things I do want to talk about, and perhaps we'll talk about it in more detail in our next conversation, but I'll just touch on it now as well, is because a lot of the things, people might be listening to this and thinking, okay, yeah, that all sounds very good, but you know, how is it really going to work? Like, for example, how are we really going to have social systems if taxation is theft and therefore, you know, can't be used? Then how are you going to fund things and stuff like that? So, like, one of the things I do with the Nations of Sanity project is I try to say, okay, I mean, I make 2 points on that question. One of the points is, from a moral point of view, it doesn't matter. It's a little bit like the question of, like, you know, how will we build roads without taxation? It's kind of same as saying, well, how will we pick cotton without slaves? It's like, well, even if I didn't have an answer to that question, it doesn't change the fact that slavery is wrong. And it doesn't change the fact that taxation is theft. So even if I didn't have an answer to those questions, the moral assertion that these things have to end is still equally valid. But it is also worth saying, just so people can picture what a free society would actually look like, it is also worth offering some ideas on how we can actually do those things, so, and actually answer those questions, even though I like to emphasize that the moral principle stands regardless. And just to give you an example, and like I say, we can perhaps go into more detail on some of this stuff, but just to give you a little example on an alternative to taxation that wouldn't involve the coercion that current taxation does, but would still provide the stable funding that that we would want from that. And that would be, we have a regulated market right now. And I don't know what you call it in America. I think you call it sales tax. Do you call it, is that the tax that's applied to what's bought and sold in the regulated market? Is it sales tax? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah. Over here in England, it's called VAT, or stands for value
added.
Yeah. But basically, it's the tax that's applied to the regulated market. So all regulated businesses obviously have to pay that one way or another at a certain point, whether it's at wholesale or retail or whatever, and the pretense of that, at least, is that what you're doing there is you're paying for the regulation of the regulated market, but you're also paying for other government services, and that's funding things like local police and maybe even healthcare. I mean, whatever is decided that it goes to. Now, in a free society, you can still have that. The difference is in a free society, the regulated market would no longer be mandatory. So like what we have now is we have the regulated market and we have the black market, which is basically the unregulated market, which is criminalized. You're not allowed to trade in the regulated market, obviously, even though people do. And obviously, black market is where you go for things that are currently illegal, like drugs or something like that. Now, my point is in a free society, the black market would be essentially decriminalized. So people would have the choice of using unregulated trade. They don't have to go down to their local shop that's a proper regulated business to buy their groceries. They could go to some geezer that's selling a dodgy bottle of milk on the corner if they wanted to, But the point about, the reason I use that example is it illustrates that in many, many instances, not all, but in many instances, people are obviously going to want to trade through the regulated market because of the various consumer protections and what have you that are inherent in that. Plus, as I say, with the added incentive would be that all the time you're using the regulated market, you're funding, your local communities and all of that through the fees that would be applied. Now, the reason why this is non-coercive is because you give people that choice, it's no longer a tax anymore. It's just a regulation fee. It's no longer theft, because even though you do have to pay it, you don't have to use the service associated with paying it. It's a little bit like saying, if you go to a restaurant, you obviously have to pay for your meal. It's not voluntary in that sense, but it is voluntary in the sense that you don't have to go to the restaurant to pay for your meal. It'll be the same thing with that. So like these businesses, they could, they don't have to trade through the regulated market, although any business that's bigger than a local business is going to want to, because at the end of the day, if you take yourself off the regulated market, then the various protections, the regulations, the consumer protections, I mean, obviously the consumers have protections, but obviously that works the other way around as well with regards to the companies themselves. So there's plenty of incentive to keep the regulated market for the most part, but there will be instances like someone says, well, yeah, but there might be instances where people won't want to use the regulated market. Like, for example, if you're just going down to some local gardener who grows vegetables, you just want to buy the fruit off him. He doesn't have to be a regulated supplier. You don't have to be a regulated thingy, and you don't have to pay a regulation fee for your transaction. It's nothing to do with anybody else. It's just between you two. Now, you're going to do that with local, you might do that with like some local person that you know well enough and you've got that community trust, but you don't have to. That's the choice. That's the point. It's your choice. But the issue is, because someone said to me once, oh, well, yeah, you'd get that with a lot, local people might just go down to their local allotment and buy fruit off the local gardener or something. It's like, well, so what? Good. That's great. Why is that a bad thing? If that was to happen, why is that a bad thing? And in those situations, they don't need the regulations, so they don't have to pay for it. So, and they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't be forced to. It's like, I want to go around to my friend's house and buy some weed off him. Why does the government need to get involved? I trust him that he's not put some horrible chemical on that weed or whatever. But if weed was legal, which it isn't at the moment, but if I wanted to go to some, say, like international company that was selling top grade cannabis, then I'm going to want to do it for a regulated supplier then, because I don't know this company. And if they were a black market company, if they were an unregulated supplier, although there'll still be certain protections that would be offered through the non-aggression principle law with regards to them not being allowed to outright poison me, it would still be a pretty low bar, and I'd want higher standards than that. It's like, and that comes back also to the comment about remembering that the non-aggression principle is just giving us our minimum standards. It's not giving us our maximum standards. So we can, we want to have that minimum where, we violate our self-ownerships, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to go beyond that. I mean, one example I like to give is I always say, I use the example of an old lady struggling to cross the street. And I say, look, the non-aggression principle doesn't demand that you help her across the street. It doesn't tell you that you can't either. It doesn't make any comment on helping her at all. It doesn't say you should or you shouldn't. It just says you shouldn't hurt her, so don't mug her. You know what I mean? But it doesn't say you've got to help her across the street. But the point is if we have a society that where we all understand that we can't mug her, then on that foundation, that's when we create a society where we teach each other that we should actually help her across the street. It's like if we can get to a place where we respect each other's self-ownership, where we don't harm each other, on that foundation we can build a society where we do more than just not harm each other. We actually help each other. We actively work together, because we're doing so in that way. We would, when people say, oh, we're in this together, then it would actually be true. We would actually be in this together, rather than now. I hate it when I hear people say, oh, we're in this together, because I think, fuck off, we're not in this together. We are as much as we're forced to be, but we're not really, because, we're not respecting even the most basic incarnation of individual rights.
I agree wholeheartedly. Absolutely. A lot of Americans, and it's weird, because that's the exact phrase that a lot of people, liberals love to, American liberals, asterisk on that, love to come back to, is that no matter what, we're all in this together. We're still, at the end of the day, we're family in their eyes, I suppose. I don't know, but the reality is that we're not, and we don't even really represent the same interests, because we don't have those founding principles of I won't harm you and you won't harm me really clearly established.
We're more like hostages than we are family,
Yes.
And I just think if we can, like I say, if we have that foundation, I think we can actually create a family. But we don't have to. There's plenty of people who be like, fuck your community, fuck your family. I don't want to be part of that. I want to be my own man. Fine. I think they'll have some eye-opening experiences. I speak to a lot of people, particularly on the right wing, who like to big up their self-reliance, like that pull yourself up from your bootstraps kind of talk. And, the problem with it is a lot of them are blind to all the ways in which they didn't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. They kind of forget all the ways in which they benefited from this society that we've all contributed to. Many of us under duress, many of us under coercion, but the fact of the matter is we all contributed to that. And as I say, if the non-aggression principle was established as law, then upon that foundation, we can actually establish a rightful ownership of that which we all have contributed to. And then our societies, because we'd actually have ownership, it'd almost be like your nation would almost be like your company that you don't own alone, everybody else owns it with you, but you equally do. Just as you have equal ownership over yourself, you would have equal ownership over the community that you are all agreeing to be part of. Like I say, I'm getting towards the end of our conversation now.
That exact, like, that thing for me is why I'm entirely against representative democracies, and why a part of my focus is progressing us past those, because once we when we push all of our political power into the hands of one person, we're just immediately taking our own skin out, taking our own, any real say that we could have had. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, it's about being able to really not just vote for something that's gonna, down the line get rejected anyways, but actually vote for something to make your interests heard and represented. And so that's to actually vote on legislation, and not to vote for some candidate. But
exactly. Like you say, if we all agree, like say, oh, well, we think we should do this as a collective community, again, within the realms of, not violating self-ownership. If we say, all right, okay, well, let's all put a vote to it then. And then, like, it turns out the majority of people didn't want it or did want it or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, that's actual democracy then, because you're actually deciding together. Rather, I mean, like I say, I'm not against people, because some people say, look, I don't want to look into this. I don't want to look into that. I trust that guy. I'll vote for him, whatever he decides. You know, if people wanted to do that, if they want to give away their power, again,
Right.
part of self-ownership is the power to do that. You know,
That's, yeah, I make it important. Like, so as far as what I see as one of my goals is to abolish the Michigan Congress. And so part of what I see replacing that is kind of caucuses or bodies of forums of discussion where participation is, you know, it's voluntary. And so you can come and you can vote on legislation that's going to affect you, or you can choose not to. But the key thing is you have the opportunity and you have the right to actually vote on that legislation, not just one person in Lansing or, you know, wherever your state capital may be.
well, I mean, and to be honest, that's the sort of thing that this Nations of Sanity project would look to implement, but on a more universal scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, national,
Yeah.
even
Yeah,
international.
because my goal is to do here in Detroit. It's been a, you know, looking at like being inspired by Bernie Sanders, like being part of that wave of people that have been, you know, kind of pulled more into politics, even though I hate to say that I hate to say that itself, because, you know, I'd hate to credit one person like Bernie Sanders or any individual, but part of being, you know, part of that wave is the goal, is like the desire to want to participate at a national level. Everything seems national, but, you know, it also boils down to the local level and what I can do here. So that's why I'm trying to do here in Detroit what I hope to be an example to set for others to do, you know, nationwide, and eventually get us there at that goal. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the sort of thing that, I mean, I'm not a big Bernie Sanders supporter myself, as you may guess, but one of the things that I liked about what he did early on, he kind of let me down when he endorsed Hillary Clinton a bit, but early on, one of the things I did like about what he was doing, although there's plenty of things that I didn't like, one of the things I did like about what he was doing was he was calling out a lot of the government corruption. He was calling out the fact
And then
that
he stopped. Yeah, yeah.
I think, unfortunately, in my opinion, he revealed himself to be.
He did. And a lot of people don't want to accept it. Yes, a lot of people don't want to accept it. Bernie Sanders. The reality of Bernie Sanders is he's an apparatus himself, or he's a part of the apparatus that, you know, functions to graft real movements into it so that they die, and they don't want to accept that, and that's really problematic right now amongst, like, you know, the people who want to call themselves real leftists in America. But you know, I'm trying to address it. That's why the conversation that you saw in Vosh, that's more or less like that's pretty tied to what that conversation was about, and it's a big focus for me right now, especially.
Yeah, no, and I can understand that as well, because it's a shame, because I think the reason why people were reluctant. I mean, do you ever watch Secular Talk? Carl Collins?
Yeah, Carl Collins. Yeah.
I mean, even though I don't consider myself, you know, fully in line there, I like his show. I like to watch a bit of left wing stuff and a bit of right wing stuff, and try to give myself a balanced a view of what's going on. But one of the things I noticed with him, because he was a big, obviously, Bernie supporter, and you could see him getting a little bit disillusioned around the Clinton stuff. And then more so, obviously, with the Biden stuff and that, and he's now at the point where he's basically washed his hands of Bernie and you know, and all of that. And it's, I mean, from my point of view, it's been kind of beautiful to see, because I've kind of wanted him to move away from that, because he like a lot of left wing people, talks a lot of sense in a lot of areas, but then there's other areas where I think, well, yeah, but you're still trying to use that ring again, you know what I mean? And you know, and that's my fundamental issue with Bernie. He's still saying, well, let's wield the ring for good, you know, kind of thing, which, as I say, I think undermines what he's trying to do. But also, I think Bernie did reveal himself, as I say, he's a party man more than anything else, and he revealed his loyalty to the party over his loyalty to the people. But again, exactly. I can understand why people are reluctant to accept that, because they think, well, where else have we got to go? You know what I mean? It's like, you know, someone like Bernie Sanders seems a hero to them because their alternatives are Hillary Clinton, you know what I mean? Or Biden, you know what I mean? So it's like, I can understand while they'll embrace someone like him, or Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez or someone like that, who at least seems to have some kind of sincere caring for the people, you know, at least actually kind of you know, the people, particularly the people that feel like they're just being ignored and forgotten. You know what I mean? So I can understand where people are coming from. They don't see any solution. And I'm hoping anyone that listens to this may start considering the Nations of Sanity as at least part of the solution, at least the first step. You know, as I say, it's not the end of the conversation, but I do sincerely believe that it's the only first step. You know, like after there's lots of ways we can go and there's discussions to be had. But for me, if the first step isn't something along the line, it doesn't have to be the Nations of Sanity project, but something along the lines of that, where we actually get everybody's self-ownership universally recognized, respected, and protected through this universally implemented law, that is the first step. Then the second and the third and the fourth step, whatever they choose to be, will be on a solid footing because we've got that foundation underneath us. And then I think we can move on. And yeah, I mean, as I say, I'll if you're up for it, I'll definitely do another conversation where perhaps we can go into a little bit more detail. I know I touched on that alternative to taxation with the regulated market, but there's a hell of a lot more we can do. And this is where voluntarism can have such a good synergistic relationship with progressive values, with even socialist values, as well as with free market values and capitalist values, you know, the consistent side of it. So, you know, that's my point about it. If we use voluntarism as the umbrella instead of the hidden fascism that we currently have, then everything else, I think, can just, it'll be the best version of it. It'll be the best version of socialism, the best version of progressivism.
That's an interesting point, because that's something I've thought about with the rise of objectivism. There's like I mentioned, this weird rise of objectivism again, and it's part of the appeal that I'm noticing with when I talk to people that, you know, align themselves in that way. I notice is that it's inherently against this partisanship, this self-labeling of I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, because it's entirely, because to them it's entirely, well, I mean, because it is hypothetically, you know, entirely separate from, you know, that whole I'm a capitalist, I'm a socialist and all of this. You know, with objectivism in particular, it tends to be like, because of who that was created by, like her entire anti-communist bias and everything that it was, it typically aligns with capitalism. But, you know, hypothetically, what because I think voluntarism more so rings true more so for voluntarism as opposed to objectivism. And so I think that's something that's very beneficial. And I just would agree that that's a good tactic, because I mean, you see people attempting kind of the same thing with other tactics by running, okay, I have left-leaning values, but I'm going to run as a Republican anyways because I want to appeal to those people, and, you know, a whole mix of different things. But I think dropping those labels entirely and having something, you know, entirely fresh would be much, you know, but a much better take at it.
Yeah, I mean, objectivism is very similar to voluntarism, but I suppose the difference is I view voluntarism as consistent, whereas objectivism,
right,
it's almost the same, but they still want a ruling government, and it's like, you can't have one because it violates the principle, you know, because everything else, they're kind of the same. Like, everyone owns themselves, and we shouldn't aggress, and property rights comes from self-ownership, and all the rest of it. But we have a government, and it's like, well, the government contradicts at least a ruling government. I mean, you know, like I say, we can talk about government in the sense of the voluntary collectives that we were talking about, but when you talk about a ruling government, whether it's an empire, a king, queen, democracy, whatever it is, when you're talking about a ruling authority that claims ownership over other people or right over them, or however you want to pass it, then you're not dealing with self-ownership. And even though the objectivists have got it like 99% right, but that little 1%, like I say, it might be a small thing, but it's still used. They want to use the ring again. You know what I mean?
The principles are the principles for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that'll probably be a good point to finish the conversation on. But to anyone listening to this, I think we'll probably have another one. So at some point, because it's been great, and it's been 2 hours and it's flown by, and I've really enjoyed it. So
wow, yeah, I would not have guessed 2 hours, but it was a great conversation. Yeah, anytime, just go ahead and, you know, message me and you know, let me know whatever time, you know, whenever you'd like to have another conversation. I'd definitely be looking forward to it.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you for your time, Anthony, and thank anybody who's listening to this, and I'll see you again soon.